I guess Matthew Tkachuk is in fact him. He has 3 game-winning goals in the series, 2 overtime winners. He just had a 2-goal game last night, and the Florida Panthers are off to the Stanley Cup final. What an insane run they're on, led by Matthew Tkachuk and of course Sergei Bobrovsky, who's been an absolute animal. But I thought, what a better time but now to simulate Matthew Tkachuk's entire career to see how good he will be. Maybe the greatest American player ever? I guess we'll find out. Matthew Tkachuk will start out at a 93 overall on the first line with Alexander Barkov and Anthony Duclair. That is a lethal first line. They got Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Reinhart, and Sam Bennett on the second line. Sam Bennett this playoffs has been like the most hated player, maybe besides Jamie Benn. What he did the other night to Mark Stone is absolutely atrocious. They have good depth. They don't have... Where the hell is Patrick Hornquist? Is he not playing in real life? Because I've not seen him at all the entire playoff run. Defensively, they're pretty good too. Montour, he's an amazing defenseman. Ekblad too, 88 and an 87. Radko Gudas is an absolute stud. And they have big Sergei Bobrovsky in the net. Now let's see if we can simulate and win a Stanley Cup with this team. Florida would end up finishing 3rd in the Atlantic with a 48, 28, and 6 record. Matthew Tkachuk had 34 goals and 91 points. Barkov had 75. Sam Bennett 59. Reinhart 59. McDavid would have the most points in the entire... Actually, no, he would be tied with Brad Marchand with 107. Okay, Marchand. Followed by Artemi Panarin, Nikita Kucherov, Jack Eichel, Jason Robertson. For goals, McDavid would have the most, though, with 56, followed by Patrick Kane's 52. Brad Marchand also had 52. Nikita Kucherov 49. And Alex Ovechkin 49. The Florida Panthers are going to be playing the Montreal Canadiens in round number 1. We would actually end up getting swept in round number 2 by the Washington Capitals. And the Carolina Hurricanes are going to go on to win the Stanley Cup as they sweep Edmonton in the Stanley Cup final. Marchand would take home the Ted Lindsay and the Hart Trophy. Meanwhile, McDavid would take home the Maurice Richard and the Art Ross. Adam Fox took home the Norris. Svechnikov would take home the Conn Smythe. Here we go again. Vasi took home the Vezina, and Bergeron would take home the Selke. Matthew Tkachuk has jumped up to a 95 overall, alongside Alexander Barkov, who is a 92, Duclair an 85. Wow, our team is very good. We picked up Max Pacioretty. Our forward core is much better than last season, and Spencer Knight has jumped up to a 90 overall. Florida Panthers would finish 2nd in the Atlantic with a 49, 27, and 6 record. Matthew Tkachuk would have an amazing season, 50 goals, 118 points. Barkov also had a great year, 88 points. Sam Reinhart at 59, Ekblad 56. Matthew Tkachuk would have the most points in the entire NHL by 10 over the fellow American rival Austin Matthews, followed by Connor McDavid, Trevor Zegras, Artemi Panarin, Troy Terry, Adam Fox. For goals, Ovi would have the most at age 38 with 55, followed by the GOAT, Nathan MacKinnon, Austin Matthews, and Matthew Tkachuk. And the Florida Panthers are going to be playing the Boston Bruins in round number 1. We already know how this one goes. Boston would bend us over and beat us in 6 games, and the Colorado Avalanche would go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in 7 games. Matthew Tkachuk is in fact him. He would take home the Ted Lindsay, the Art Ross, and the Hart Trophy. Adam Fox with another Norris Trophy. Nathan MacKinnon would take home the Conn Smythe. Tristan Jarry somehow won the Vezina, and Horvat would take home the Selke. Matthew Tkachuk has jumped up to a 96 overall. Barkov is up to a 94. Okay. Kevin LeBanc, Duclair. Yeah, we have a very good team. I have no idea how we lost to Boston in round number 1. The Florida Panthers would end up finishing 1st in the Atlantic with a 57, 18, and 7 record. Matthew Tkachuk would have a great season yet again, 49 goals and 102 points. Barkov had 94. Kevin LeBanc had 71. Reinhardt 65. Leon Draisaitl would have the most points though with 114, followed by Connor McDavid, Mitch Marner, Nathan MacKinnon, Matthew Tkachuk, and William Nylander, who had 102. And the Florida Panthers are going to be playing the Carolina Hurricanes in round number 1, and we also know how that one went. Matthew Tkachuk with 4.3 seconds left. Finally, Florida has made the Stanley Cup final. We are up against the Anaheim Ducks. Somehow the Ducks made the Stanley Cup final 3 years in. Alright, EA, I'll run with it, I guess. And the Florida Panthers have won the Stanley Cup. Matthew Tkachuk gets his first Stanley Cup of his career. Hopefully the first of many after a hard-fought series against the Anaheim Ducks. Of course, Matthew Tkachuk is your Conn Smythe winner. He is in fact him. Don't play with this man. Top 5 player in the league easily. And here comes the captain of the Florida Panthers, Alexander Barkov, coming to lift the Stanley Cup for the first time in his career, and I believe the first time in franchise history. But here's the man that we all came to see, Matthew Tkachuk, lifting the Stanley Cup for the very first time. Soak it in, buddy. Matthew Tkachuk would have 12 goals and 26 points in the playoffs. Matthew Tkachuk would take home the Maurice Richard this season. Mitch Marner would take home the Hart Trophy. Matthew would also take home the Conn Smythe, obviously. Spencer Knight would actually take home the Vezina, and Elias Lindholm would take home the Selke. Matthew Tkachuk Tkachuk is a 96 overall, still on the first line with Alexander Barkov, who now is a 94, and Kevin LeBanc, fresh off of our first ever Stanley Cup in franchise history. Florida would yet again have an amazing regular season, finishing first in the Atlantic with a 50, 28, and 4 record. Matthew Tkachuk would yet again have a great season, 47 goals, 112 points, followed by Alexander Barkov with 88, Brendan Montour 70, Bergeron had 66 at age 40. He also would have 36 goals. Tkachuk would have the most points in the entire NHL, followed by Nathan MacKinnon, Alex Ovechkin at 40 years old, David Pastrnak, Gabriel Landeskog had 94, and Cole Caulfield with 91. Wait a minute, Cole Caulfield had 58 goals? What is going on in this simulation? For goals, Caulfield had the most with 58, followed by Ovi, McKinnon, McDavid, and then Matthew Tkachuk. And the Florida Panthers are going to be playing the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round of the playoffs. The Florida Panthers are back in the Stanley Cup final, this time against the Minnesota Wild. Will Matthew Tkachuk and the Cats go back-to-back? Matthew Tkachuk and the Florida Panthers are going to go back-to-back as Stanley Cup champions. Tkachuk will get his second ring of his career after beating the Minnesota Wild in Game 7. Matthew Tkachuk yet again is your Conn Smythe winner. Chucky, baby. And here comes our captain, Alexander Barkov, coming to lift the Stanley Cup for the second time in 2 years. The Florida Panthers are yet again your Stanley Cup champions. And here he is, the Rat King, Matthew Tkachuk, lifting the Stanley Cup for the second time in his career. Chucky is a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. Tkachuk would have 15 goals and 29 points in the playoffs. Matthew Tkachuk would take home the Art Ross and the Conn Smythe Trophy. Matthew Tkachuk is still a 96 overall, still on the first line with Alexander Barkov and Kevin LeBanc, and we still have a decent supporting cast around him. The Florida Panthers would end up finishing second in the Atlantic with a 50, 27, and 5 record. Matthew Tkachuk would have 48 goals and 105 points, followed by Alexander Barkov's 86, Sam Reinhart with 71, Lundell had 67, and Verhaeghe had 61. Connor McDavid would lead the entire NHL in points with 109, followed by Philip Forsberg, who had 108, Jesper Janssen had 107, Matthew Tkachuk, Austin Matthews. McDavid would damn near have 60 goals, followed by Nathan MacKinnon, Austin Matthews, and Matthew Tkachuk is down here with 48. Toronto would end up getting the revenge on us, beating us in the second round in 5 games, and they would go on to win the Stanley Cup as they sweep the Colorado Avalanche. Connor McDavid is Connor McDavid. Matthew Tkachuk would take home the Hart Trophy. Sidney Crosby would take home the Lady Bing. Mitch Marner would actually take home the Conn Smythe. Matthew Tkachuk is still a 96 overall. Florida would end up having a terrible regular season, not even making the playoffs. We would finish with a 39, 34, and 9 record. Matthew Tkachuk would still have a decent season, 33 goals, 98 points. Barkov had 86. Lundell had 82. Wow, okay. Sam Reinhart, 64. LeBanc, 56. McDavid would have the most points in the NHL with 115, followed by Connor Bedard, Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, and Jack Eichel. Tkachuk would be up there though with 98 points. And the Vegas Golden Knights are going to go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat Ottawa in 6 games. Connor McDavid is the greatest player ever. Cale Makar would take home the Norris. Jack Eichel would take home the Conn Smythe. Alexander Barkov would take home the Selke. Matthew Tkachuk is still sitting at a 96 overall, but we are getting a bit older. Alexander Barkov has dropped off a little bit. The Florida Panthers would yet again miss the playoffs, missing this year by 4 points to the Buffalo Sabres. We would end up finishing with a 42, 34, and 6 record, and it looks like we are falling off at the moment. Jesus Christ. We're down here with Detroit, Boston, and Montreal. Alexander Barkov would actually lead our team in points. He had 40 goals and 96 points. Meanwhile, Matthew Tkachuk did have 40 goals but 95 points, so they were basically the same, followed by Sam Reinhart, 73, Aaron Ekblad, 69. Nice. Mitch Marner would have the most points in the entire NHL with 110, followed by Connor McDavid, Timmy Stu. Sidney Crosby at 41 years old had a 100-point season, and another year goes by where the Florida Panthers did not make the playoffs. We need to get back on track, man. We went back to back and then we just fell off a cliff. And the Buffalo Sabres would actually go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat Nashville in 6 games. Mitch Marner would take home the Ted Lindsay, the Art Ross, and the Hart Trophy. Meanwhile, Bedsy, he would take home the Maurice Richard. Rasmus Dahlin would take home the Conn Smythe. Matthew Tkachuk is a 96 overall. And why do we have Alexander Barkov as our second line center over Stefan Karlsson, who's a 78 and 19 19 years old. That is not happening here, buddy. Very questionable coaching decisions for sure. Yet again, for a third year in a row, the Florida Panthers are going to miss the playoffs. We would finish the year with a 43, 34, and 5 record, but yet again, no playoffs for Florida. Tough times here in Sunrise. Despite missing the playoffs, Matthew Tkachuk would have a great season, 48 goals and 110 points, followed by Sam Reinhart, 88, Alexander Barkov, 84, Seth Jarvis, 62. He would also have the most points in the entire NHL, followed by Austin Matthews, Connor Bedard, David Pastrnak, and Mikko Rantanen. For goals, Connor Bedard would have the most with 63, followed by Patrick Laine and Austin Matthews. And the Colorado Avalanche would go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat the Rangers in 7 games. Matthew Tkachuk would take home the Ted Lindsay, the Art Ross, and the Hart Trophy. Cole Caulfield would take home the Conn Smythe. Wait, for the Colorado Avalanche, Matthew Tkachuk still is a 96 overall. Barkov has dropped down to an 89. And we have Joaquin Flynn as our first line center at an 87 overall, 21 years old. Hopefully we can make the playoffs this season. After missing the playoffs for 3 straight seasons, I think it's finally time. Matthew Tkachuk, you're the new captain of the Florida Panthers. Sorry, Barkov, buddy, but you're just not getting it done at this point. Yet again, the Florida Panthers are just gonna miss the playoffs. While we missed by 14 points, it was not even close. We would finish with a 43, 35, and 4 record. So our record wasn't even that bad. I guess our division is just that stacked. Matthew Tkachuk would have 34 goals and 87 points. Sam Reinhart at 81. Dylan Guenther, we picked him up. He had 66. Barkov, 65. Austin Matthews would have 71 goals and 126 points. Nylander had 117. Marner had 114. What the hell is going on here in Toronto? Followed by Zegras, who had 110. McDavid, Pastrnak, Timo Meier. The Anaheim Ducks would go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat Detroit in 5 games. Mason McTavish would take home the Conn Smythe. Matthew Tkachuk has dropped down to a 93 overall. Finally, the Florida Panthers will make the playoffs. We would finish with a 46, 32, and 4 record and finish 4th in the Atlantic. Matthew Tkachuk would have 30 goals and 86 points. Sam Reinhart had 73. Barkov, 66. Jesper Janssen would lead the entire NHL in points with 109, followed by Connor Bedard, William Nylander, and Austin Matthews. And the Florida Panthers are going to be playing the Columbus Blue Jackets in round number 1, and they would end up beating us in 5 games in the very first round. Connor Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks would go on to win the Stanley Cup as they beat Columbus in 7 games. Bedsy would take home the Maurice Richard yet again, his 3rd in 4 years, and he would also take home the Conn Smythe. And just like that, Matthew Tkachuk has decided to retire. He would score 779 goals, 1,203 assists for 1,982 points in 1,887 games played. That is a lot of hockey. He would have very good numbers over the course of his career in the regular season and in the playoffs. He was an absolute gamer when he won back-to-back Conn Smythe trophies with the Florida Panthers. He had 26 points in 24 games and 29 points in 24 games the year after. Matthew Tkachuk would finish his career with 2 Art Ross trophies, 2 Hart trophies, 1 Ted Lindsay award, 2 Conn Smythes, and 2 Stanley Cups. One of the greatest American players of all time. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you turn notifications on so you don't miss a single upload. And remember, don't be silly. Wrap your willy.